Welcome, Gunrunner.
Looking at the results of the more recent Amazing Facts polls I've run on this channel, it's pretty clear that you want to see more of the obscure systems covered again, after we briefly diverted to looking at more well-known platforms like the Atari ST, Sega Dreamcast and Commodore Amiga. That was certainly made clear in the latest poll, where the Sharp X1 beat the Commodore 16 by just 1% after they swapped places several times, despite a very late and brave fight back by the third placed Amstrad CPC. This is the third Japanese exclusive system I've covered in a row in this series, and following on from the NEC PC-98 and Bandai WonderSwan, although I'd argue this is more obscure than both, and possibly the most obscure system I've covered in the series. That doesn't make the Sharp X1 any less worthy though. In fact, I'd argue that it's very worthy indeed, not just because it's a really interesting system, but also because we've already looked at its 16-bit successor, the Sharp X68000, and this video very much leads into that one perfectly, helping to create an even better story. As always, I'm going to keep most of the interesting stuff for the main part of the video, but I do want to give a little bit of background before we start. The Sharp X1 was released in Japan in October 1982 to much fanfare. The company already had a solid reputation for building very capable home computers, but the X1 was well ahead of the curve. Based around a Zilog Z80 CPU running at 4MHz with a 3-channel AY sound chip, 64K of RAM, 8 colours and both high and low resolution graphic modes, the computer offered serious bang for your buck, being priced at 155,000 yen, which is equivalent to around £1,150 in today's money or $1,380, bearing in mind this was a full computer setup right out the box, with a proper keyboard, and so it compared very well with the competition. It was followed by many revisions which I'll go into in due course, and wasn't officially discontinued until 1990. It's unknown how many units were sold in total, but Sharp did consider the computer to be a big success, despite it remaining in third place on the market for much of its commercial life, behind the NEC PC-88 and MSX. So it's about time we celebrated the Sharp X1 properly, and this video is the perfect way to do that.
New Life Sharp
アニメする人に X1F デビュー
じゃーん、僕の大好きなラムちゃんはまつげの一本一本まで綺麗に描いてあげたい。だからグラフィックが緻密でペイントの速い X1F のデビューが嬉しい
アートする人に X1F
作り手の事故が視覚として意識化されるという一種のパフォーマンスを企てたい僕としては、イージーな操作でありながらも中間色の表現まで完璧にやってのける X1F の出現は新たな筆であり、新たなキャンバスのデビューであるわけです。
これからの人にも X1F
テレビも見れるし遊べるし、だから選びました。やったー、
みんなに X1F 高速グラフィック機能搭載、みんなに嬉しいパソコンテレビ X1F シャープです。
And it's all going on at Sharp.
I think the first thing we need to talk about here with regards to the Sharp X1 range is its looks. It's hard to argue against somebody naming it the best looking home computer of all time. It really does stand out from the crowd, and this design aesthetic very much became a trademark of Sharp, being carried through to the X1's successor, the X68000 too. Now, without spoiling the rest of this video too much, later on you'll hear me talking about Sharp's other computers from the same era, and these are nowhere near as nice looking, and there is a reason for that. You see, within Sharp itself there is two separate groups that built computers. Firstly, the actual personal computer division, and secondly, the television division. It might surprise you to learn that the X1 actually came from the latter, and I'll go into the importance of this in the next part of this video. Now, I'm sure you're already aware that back in the 80s the look of a TV was actually just as important as its functionality. That's why you had wood grain style cases to match your furniture, different colours, nowadays most TVs just seem to be black, and different types of stands to accompany them. Because styling was so important in TVs, this division also concluded that styling was just as important for computers too. By putting the stylings of the X1 at the forefront, we got those sleek shiny cases, different colours, perfectly matching accessories and add-ons, but with no detriment to the actual functionality of the product. It's a shame that more companies didn't follow Sharp's philosophy.
And it's all going on at Sharp.
As I mentioned in the last entry, the Sharp X1 was actually designed by the TV division of the company, and not the computer part. But as well as being responsible for the super sexy stylings of the X1, they were also responsible for one of the computer's most innovative and interesting features, which you never really hear people talk about. And this amazing feature was the ability to watch TV on your X1. And I know what you're thinking, it just connects up to a regular TV, right? How is that special? And yes, it can, but Sharp also offered a range of specific X1 monitors that perfectly match the designs of their computers. And unlike the special monitors available for other home computers, these ones could also double up as TVs. What made this feature even cooler still was that Sharp supplied a special program that allowed your computer to control the TV aspect, like you would with a regular remote. In fact, Sharp's TV division was so proud of their work on the X1 that in the late noughties they released a special edition model of the Aquos Internet TV set-top box that was inspired by the stylings of the X1 and featured the exact same vibrant shade of red.
And it's all going on at Sharp.
In 1984, 2 years after the computer's debut, Sharp introduced the X1 Turbo range, which sought to enhance the Micro's game-playing abilities in the face of new rival machines like the MSX, Sega SC3000 and Sword M5 that were very much made with gaming in mind. The X1 Turbo then became the default configuration and went through 4 further revisions of its own to keep pace with other new systems like the MSX2 and Nintendo Famicom. The first Turbo model added several important new features, including a special chip to display a Japanese kanji character set, more resolution modes, greatly increased video RAM, and also offered the ability to add a new FM audio module. The first X1 Turbo also gave the choice of a built-in tape deck or 1 or 2 built-in disk drives. Later models with disk only made the FM module a standard feature and upped the RAM to 128K. The fifth and final model in the range was the Turbo Z2, which was released in 1988. This wasn't unlike the X1's successor, the Sharp X68000 in design, looking a lot like a PC compatible, and featured specs that were comparable with many 16-bit computers of the time, not unlike the rival MSX2 computers in many regards actually. The main improvements of the X1 Turbo Z2 were graphical ones, with more new screen modes and a choice of up to 4096 colours, but it did also offer an optional hard drive for the first time too, as well as a completely new version of Z Basic to take advantage of the new hardware on offer. These computers are now very rare, as they weren't on the market for very long before being completely phased out in favour of the aforementioned Sharp X68000.
And it's all going on at Sharp.
I think one of the strangest facts related to the Sharp X1 is that it wasn't the only 8-bit computer sold by Sharp during the early to mid-80s. Although it certainly wasn't unusual for computer companies to market several different machines at the same time, they usually had a point of difference from each other. For example, a high-end and a budget offering, or one home-focused and one business-focused. But Sharp confused the market greatly by directly competing with themselves. Most notably, we had the MZ range, which unlike the X1, was actually sold in Europe and other parts of the world too. First introduced in 1978, 4 years before the X1 made its debut, early models like the MZ80 were particularly notable for their unusual looks. These bulky units included a built-in tape deck, an irregular but uniformly shaped keyboard, and a space for a monitor to be mounted directly on top, a lot like the rival Commodore PET actually, but with a more horizontally focused design aesthetic. Later models did adopt a proper QWERTY keyboard, some also featured built-in monitors too. We saw the tape deck being replaced with a 5¼ inch disk drive, and like other Sharp computers, the name was very self-explanatory. The M stood for micro, and the Z80 part was of course the CPU, although the number 80 was replaced with higher numbers on later models to show they were more powerful and higher spec'd. Although early models were more business focused with very crude audio-visual capabilities, later MZ computers like the MZ1500 were very capable indeed, with 64K of RAM, 16 colours, 3-channel sound and hardware scrolling. But the same can't be said for Sharp's other range of computers during this period, that very much remained business focused. The professional computer range was much more focused on tasks like word processing, databases and spreadsheets, and came in two distinct forms, desktops and laptops, with the latter proving by far the most popular. So much so in fact that Sharp soon dropped the desktop range to focus solely on these.
And it's all going on at Sharp.
Now, I've mentioned the rival MSX computers a few times in this video already, but I need to come back to them for a moment, because there's actually an interesting story regarding the format that nearly resulted in the early cancellation of the Sharp X1. I'm not going to go into the creation of the MSX standard here, as I've covered it in plenty of other videos, including a 10 amazing MSX facts video of course, that I will link in the description for those who want to see it, but I do need to go back to the time of its creation. The year was 1982 and the combination of the ASCII Corporation and Microsoft Japan was just finalising the design of the MSX standard and seeking out partners to bring the hardware to market. As one of the leading electronics companies in Japan, Sharp were one of the first they approached, but at this time Sharp were already preparing to launch the X1 and had to make a quick decision on what would be the best route for them. They soon decided that their own hardware was the much better option. They didn't like the fact they would have to pay a licensing fee to obtain the MSX and pay royalties on every computer sold. They were also concerned about the lack of control they would have over the format and having to share all the developments with their rivals. Sharp were a fiercely independent company and wanted to buck the trend rather than follow it, and also wanted to retain a point of difference from their many rivals. However, despite turning down the chance to become part of the MSX revolution in Japan, they didn't dismiss the format completely. You see, one of the many subsidiaries of Sharp was a company called Epcom, who were one of the leading electronics manufacturers in Brazil. Come the mid-80s, and home computers were starting to become popular in this part of South America. Epcom didn't want to be left out and ended up releasing the Hot Bit, not to be confused with the Sony Hit Bit, a fully MSX compatible computer that was released in November 1985. The MSX had already started to gain a foothold in the country, mainly because it was very easy to clone, and so Sharp felt it was much wiser to try and exploit that market rather than introduce one of their own computers to the region. This decision was soon justified, as the Epcom Hot Bit proved to be very popular in Brazil and went through several different revisions during its lifetime.
And it's all going on at Sharp.
One of the most interesting aspects of the Sharp X1 is what the Japanese press of the era called clean computing. This term specifically referred to home computers that had no operating system in the ROM, meaning that when you booted them up, you had the whole memory available, rather than a portion of that valuable RAM being used by a command line interface or a version of the basic programming language. On many early home computers that used cartridges, for example the Atari 8-bit, it wouldn't load the BASIC if the cartridge was inserted, so the full memory could be used. But on computers that used tapes and discs, they nearly always required you to load the game after the operating system had initialised, but not so on the X1. This gave programmers more memory to play with when creating games and other software, but this did mean that those who wanted to use their machine to program themselves would have to load the BASIC in first. Another advantage of this was that the users weren't restricted to using the stock version of BASIC, and indeed there were several different ones available for the X1 throughout its life. The two main ones were Sharp's own X-Basic, which was later upgraded to Turbo Basic and then Z-Basic as the hardware evolved, and the second option was Hudson Soft's Hue Basic, which many Japanese computer fans were already very familiar with from other systems.
And it's all going on at Sharp.
I think this X1 fact leads on quite nicely from the last one, because it also revolves around the inner workings of the computer and another very clever trick it had up its sleeve. Something a lot more interesting and innovative too, especially when compared to its rivals. You see, the Sharp X1 offered up a completely programmable character set that also featured 4-bit colour, making it ideal for use in games. On top of this, the entirety of the video RAM was mapped into the I/O area, so it could be controlled without bank switching, giving even more advantages for programming games specifically. This is why a lot of games look more visually impressive on the X1 compared to its rivals, despite there not being a huge difference in the actual capabilities of the hardware. Sharp refined a lot of these ideas and hardware features for use in the X1's successor, the X68000, which is one of the main reasons why it was so highly regarded as a games machine. Despite the Sharp X1 being left in a distant third place behind the MSX and NEC PC-88, when it came to 8-bit computers in the land of the rising sun, it's pretty clear that it was by far the best suited to playing games, and offered up the most innovative hardware too.
And it's all going on at Sharp.
While there are lots of different models of the Sharp X1 out there, all very sexy looking, there is no doubt that the X1 Twin, or CZ830C to give the computer its full name, is the hottest of them all. Not just because of its undeniably stylish looks, but also because of what it can actually do. Now, those of you who follow my channel may remember me featuring this in my 7 computers that could play games from rival consoles video, but there's no way I couldn't not feature it here too. As the name obviously suggests, this big black unit combines the popular Japanese Sharp X1 computer with another totally different system, in this case the NEC PC Engine console. What is most incredible about this is that in the Japanese computer market, NEC were one of Sharp's biggest rivals, with both their PC-88 and PC-98 ranges. It really makes you wonder how a deal like this came about in the first place, especially when you consider that Sharp already had an agreement in place with Nintendo that saw them produce the Famicom Twin console, which combines the base unit along with a Famicom disk system into one sleek looking box. Released in 1987 for a cost of 99,800 yen, it could play Sharp X1 and X1 Turbo games via the built-in floppy disk drive, as well as standard PC Engine Hue cards via the front slot, and also featured built-in controller ports, volume control, stereo audio output, and all your other standard TV monitor and expansion ports. Unfortunately, there was no way to use both the PC Engine and Sharp X1 hardware at once, so there was no specific software aimed at this computer. These were never sold in large numbers due to the high cost, and the Sharp X1 Twin is now very rare and sought after by collectors.
And it's all going on at Sharp.
It's often been said that a computer is only as good as its games. It's only right that I spend a moment to talk about just what the Sharp X1 had to offer in this regard, especially as you, my audience, have asked me to talk about the games a lot more in these types of videos. Of all the companies that supported the Sharp X1, the most interesting and most notable in many regards is Hudson Soft. Not just because they supported the computer with versions of many of their own classic games like Stop the Express, Bomberman and Cannonball, but they were also responsible for porting a number of classic Nintendo games to the system too, including the likes of Donkey Kong 3, Super Mario Bros. And Ice Climber. Then there was also the likes of Namco with Galaga, Pac-Man and Bosconian among others, Data East with the likes of Burger Time, Bump and Jump and Cobra Command, Konami offering up titles like Hypersports, Gradius and The Goonies, and another arcade legend in Taito with hits like Arkanoid, Elevator Action and Frontline. And there were even some great Sega arcade conversions courtesy of Denpa, like Hang On, Flicky and Space Harrier, along with all the usual Japanese RPGs like Hide Lied, Dragon Slayer and Ys, as well as computer classics like Choplifter, Archon and Miner 2049er. Plenty of awesome games to choose from there, I'm sure you'll agree.
And it's all going on at Sharp.
Released in 1987, the Sharp X1's successor was part of the holy trinity of 16-bit Japanese home computers. Just as we in the UK had the Atari ST, Commodore Amiga and Acorn Archimedes, in the land of the rising sun they had the Fujitsu FM Towns, NEC PC-98 and this micro the Sharp X68000. Like our own 16-bitters, it was eventually pushed aside by PC compatibles, but not before it made a big impression on its audience, and it's still very fondly remembered by Japanese retro gamers everywhere. I'm sure you're already aware of this, but the name is a direct reference to its Motorola 68000 CPU, which as many will also know was the processor at the heart of both the Atari ST and the Commodore Amiga, as well as several games consoles too, like the Sega Mega Drive and SNK Neo Geo. but the variant that was included in the X68000 was clocked at a much faster 10 MHz and was supported by a wide range of custom chips as well as a very healthy amount of RAM too. There was 3 sound chips offering up to 14 channels in total, over 65,000 colours, dedicated video RAM, specialist sprite generator, hardware scrolling, multiple playfields and high resolution modes too, not to mention a wide range of add-ons and upgrades to improve this further. Later models of the computer actually replaced the 16-bit Motorola 68000 with its 32-bit successor, the 68030. The same CPU we also saw used in the Atari Falcon, giving it even more grunt. The computer proved a huge success for Sharp, being the choice of many Japanese gamers during the 16-bit generation. In fact, its gaming prowess was so highly regarded that Capcom used the X68000 as the development machine for their arcade games. If you want to know more about this absolute beast, then follow the link in the description to the 10 amazing Sharp X68000 facts video I did just over a year ago.
New life now.
I will show you.
君はもうパソコンテレビに触れたか。コンピュータとテレビとの結合がブラウン管をいよいよエキサイティングにする。どこまで広がる新映像。アクティブタイプ、プロフェッショナルタイプを加えてシャープパソコンテレビ。
And that rounds up my look at 10 amazing Sharp X1 facts. But which one of these fabulous facts was your favourite, or can you think of any other tantalising tidbits of trivia that I didn't include? I always love to hear the thoughts and views of my audience, so please get typing in that comments section. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons who continue to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following patrons and YouTube backers in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Grady Haynes, Mitchell Valentino, Seth A. Robinson, Carl Olsen, Dos Gamerman, Sonic Mania 999, Paul Daniel, Andrew McKay, Retro Resolution, Matt Standish, James Taylor, Trogdor the Burninator, Mins, 8-Bit Guy, Luke MC, Ben P. Stein, Tabby Kitsune, Alan J. Dodds, Daniel Skoronsky, and Electron Scar Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now, where you can get access to host extra content including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.